Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Mike Davis, and I run the Article 3 Project, or A3P for short. Today, we are hearing from Senator Mike Lee from Utah. Senator Lee served as a law clerk to Justice Scalia. He currently is on the Senate Judiciary Committee. I got to work closely with Senator Lee during the Kavanaugh confirmation last Congress when I served as the Chief Counsel for Nominations to then Chairman Chuck Grassley from my home state of Iowa. Senator Lee is a rock solid constitutionalist, a great guy, a fantastic senator. And I will skip a lot of the intro that I normally do for these calls about A3P and Senator Lee's background, just because he has a member meeting coming up here at 11. So I'd rather have it where we get to more questioning than going through my script. I would just say that if you want to check out the Article 3 Project's website, it's article3project.org, article3project.org. And also, if you look at, there's a feature on there called judiciarytracker.com, judiciarytracker.com, and that shows the near record shattering progress that President Trump and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and my former boss, Chuck Grassley, the former chairman and the current chairman, Lindsey Graham, and other Republicans like Senator Mike Lee on the Judiciary Committee. It shows their historic transformation of the federal judiciary. And I think it's important to look at that. They have helped appoint Justice Gorsuch, Justice Kavanaugh. They're soon, on Monday, we're going to appoint Justice Amy Coney Barrett. They have appointed in a near record 53 judges to the critically important federal courts of appeals. These courts of appeals are the last stop for more than 99% of federal appeals, so they're critically important spots. The president and Senate Republicans have flipped 3 federal circuits, the regional circuits around the country, the 2nd, 3rd, and 11th, from majority Republican appointed to majority Democrat appointed. The 9th Circuit has shown tremendous progress. When President Trump took office there on this 29-seat 9th Circuit, President Trump started with 11 more Democrat-appointed judges than Republicans. That is down to just 3. And in President Trump's 2nd term, he could do something unthinkable for a Republican president, and that is actually flip the 9th Circuit along with every other circuit in the country. And what that means is that it is more likely that the rule of law will prevail, that courts will protect our First Amendment rights, whether it's to speak, whether it's to associate on college campuses, whether it's to worship, our Second Amendment rights to protect ourselves. All rights are on the line. We're going to talk about this more with Senator Lee with court packing. If the Democrats, if Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and the Democrats are able to implement their 2020 Democrat committee platform and pack the Supreme Court and maybe the lower courts, we could see those rights go right out the window. So with that, I want to turn this over to Senator Lee, but I would say this, so we don't get, what I've been doing on these calls, so we don't get Zoom bombed, please text me your questions, and I will go through the questions and ask him, moderate these questions. My phone number is 202-641-4251. Again, 202-641-4251. And I'll try to get through as many as I can. And if I can combine them, if they're the same question, I'll combine them. But with that, let me turn this over. Senator Lee, do you have any opening remarks you'd like to make to this group before we get to the questioning?
I'm just grateful to be part of this call today, and so happy that you've put the Article 3 project together. I'm a big fan of Mike Davis's and got to know him really well as he was running the operations in the Senate Judiciary Committee. He's personally responsible for an enormous volume of the progress that we've made in the federal courts over the last couple of years, and look forward to talking to each of you and answering any questions you've got.
Well, I appreciate that very much. And let's go through these. Let's talk about Judge Amy Coney Barrett. She just went through the committee vote yesterday. She got unanimously reported to the Senate floor. All 12 Republicans voted for her. And the reason is that the Democrats didn't show up to work yesterday, which is, it made your job a lot easier. But Judge Amy Coney Barrett, 48 years old. She is a law professor at Notre Dame Law School for the last 18 years. She clerked for 2 prestigious judges, including Judge Scalia on the Supreme Court of the United States. She has #1 in her class at Notre Dame Law School. Talk about Judge Barrett and what she means, what her appointment to the Supreme Court means to all of us, to the federal judiciary and to the rest of us.
One of the many things I love about Judge Barrett and the fact that we're going to be putting her on the Supreme Court is the fact that she perfectly embodies our vision about what it means to restore the federal courts. We're not trying to revolutionize America. We're not trying to change America. We're just trying to restore that which already existed, that which has been lost and deteriorated over the course of the last few decades. The left has, in many instances, commandeered the federal judiciary, which, despite its flaws and despite having been partially commandeered over the last few decades, our federal court system is still the best of its kind anywhere in the world. But we have had some problems in that we've had the courts engineering social policy. We've had the courts taking debatable matters beyond debate in the name of the Constitution wrongfully. And the interesting thing is that the left accuses us of trying to do that which they have been doing somewhat successfully for decades, which is trying to force through change. It's just not accurate at all. All we want to do is make sure that political matters are handled by the political branches of government, and that we leave judging to judges. That is the task of deciding what the law means in response to a particular case and controversy, based on the words of the law and the Constitution, rather than on the basis of policy preferences. Judge Barrett is a really good, really consistent, in fact, unusually talented and gifted jurist in this regard. She doesn't come to the effort with a lot of fanfare. As you saw in the confirmation proceedings, she's able to sit there without a single note and without ever once losing her temper, without ever once losing her calm, just respond neutrally, even-handedly, objectively, based on what the law says. It's exactly what we need. She's the natural fulfillment of the sequence of events that Justice Scalia helped set in motion back in 1986 when he was nominated to the Supreme Court himself.
I have a question here from Jeremy Peters from the New York Times. And the question is that since conservatives have made so much progress in filling vacancies at all levels of the judiciary, what is your concern that voters become complacent? And what's your message to them to make sure that they don't?
Well, just look at what happens next. Look at what happens if there is a sweeping Democratic victory, one in which they win the White House and win the Senate. They've already promised us essentially that they will nuke the filibuster, making it possible for them to adopt legislation without closing debate with the customary 60-vote threshold. That can be done only in unusual circumstances right now using what's called budget reconciliation, but all other legislation has to be brought to a debate has to be brought to a close, and that takes 60 votes before you can get to a final simple majority vote. That by itself would open the door for them to do a number of things that can be done by statute, which they could and would presumably do if they had the House and the Senate and the White House. So after nuking the filibuster, I believe they are likely to pack the Supreme Court. Why? Well, because they've told us, they've told their own base that, and then when asked about it more publicly, they demur and say, well, we're not going to say. The only reason you would not say in response to changing something that's 151 years old, that's worked well for us, that's helped establish this bulwark to protect separation of powers within our constitutional framework, is if you're planning to do it. The problem is that once you start escalating it, it becomes a one-way ratchet. If they add, say, 2, maybe 4 seats to the Supreme Court, it's as predictable as the sun rising in the east tomorrow that the next time the Republicans are in control of the House and the Senate and the White House, they'll escalate it again. And before you know it, the Supreme Court starts to look less like a court and more like a political body. Starts to look, it's manageable with 9 justices. One could argue that it wouldn't be that different with 11, but again, you will ratchet it up, because once you confirm a Supreme Court justice, you can't remove them in the absence of a death, a retirement, or impeachment and removal. Those are very rare. And so what you would have is a political football moving incrementally, each time increasing the number of justices. And so over time, you'd see it increase. It would start to look like the intergalactic Senate in Star Wars. That would be weird. They would also do a number of other things. I think they're likely to add a couple of states, DC and Puerto Rico, which would also be facilitated by the nuclear option. So all of this would end up changing the courts, and I suspect there would be an effort to pack the lower courts as well, at least the circuit courts. So that ought to be concerning, and ought to be something that motivates people who are concerned about these issues to show up to the polls.
Well, that leads to the next question from Charles Downs with Keep 9. And his question for you, Senator Lee, is this. Do you think Senator Cruz's Keep 9 amendment will be brought to the floor for a vote before the election so the American voters have an idea if their senators support court packing or not?
Okay, just to be clear, are you talking here about Ted Cruz's amendment, his constitutional amendment, or are you talking about his Senate point of order?
It doesn't say, and Charles,
okay,
if you want to text me, but maybe the constitutional amendment?
Yeah, so I think it is somewhat more likely that we could end up voting on the Senate point of order. The Senate point of order mechanism would require that any future Senate would have to overcome a point of order that would be overcomable, I think, only with 75 votes in order to proceed with legislation that would add to the size of the Supreme Court. I think that is very possible that we could end up getting a vote on that between now and the end of the year. It's harder to say with the constitutional amendment, particularly in light of the fact that we don't have anywhere near 2/3. We wouldn't get anywhere near the 2/3 threshold in the Senate, I don't think, to pass that. And in the House, we don't even have a majority. So that one seems less likely. But if we establish the Senate point of order, that's doable. And that one seems more likely to get a vote this year. I'm a co-sponsor of both, by the way.
Let's talk about the Senate attacks on Judge Barrett's faith and family since 2017, really. Back in 2017, when I was still there, we saw Senate Democrats, including Dianne Feinstein, the top Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, telling Judge Barrett that the dogma lives loudly within you, and that is of concern. We saw Dick Durbin on the Judiciary Committee, the number 2 Democrat in the Senate, asking Judge Barrett whether she was an Orthodox Catholic, whatever the heck that means. We saw Senator Kamala Harris, the vice presidential nominee, asking Judge Busher from Nebraska about his involvement in the Catholic men's charity, the Knights of Columbus, and Senator Macy Hirono, my favorite senator from Hawaii, asked the same thing. And so we saw that pretty explicitly through her confirmation process in 2017. I think they learned their lesson this time, most of them anyway, and they were less vocal with the anti-Catholic bigotry and dog whistling for the Supreme Court hearing. But we saw the outside groups do it. We saw the blue checkmark crowd, Democrat operatives on the outside, going after Judge Barrett, calling her racist because her and her husband adopted 2 kids from Haiti, attacking her Catholic faith again. We saw Bill Maher, the comedian, going after her Catholic faith. It just never ends. What is your response? We have Article 6 of the Constitution, which forbids a religious test for officers of the United States, including judicial officers. What is your response to these Democrat attacks on Judge Barrett's faith and family?
Well, they're unfair and they're wrong. They are inconsistent with both the letter and the spirit of the religious test prohibition in Article 6. They're also inconsistent, at least, with the spirit, if not the letter, of the free exercise clause in the First Amendment. Mike, as I recall, I think you were in the room with me. I think you were sitting just to my left and behind me when Judge Barrett had her original confirmation hearing back in 2017. And I think your reaction was similar to mine. When Senator Feinstein first started talking that way, I was confused. I thought, certainly I'm hearing her wrong. Certainly she's not actually saying what I think she's saying. There's got to be a better explanation for this. But she really was asking about, her concern that the dogma lives loudly within you. This is something that concerns me deeply, and as it did when Senator Durbin asked her whether she was an Orthodox Catholic, because it gets to the heart of the very interests that the ban on religious tests were intended to prohibit and preclude, and so too with the religion clauses of the First Amendment. These are touchy, sensitive things, and they're things that we've decided as a society, with good reason, that we need to protect. We need to protect religious freedom, because religious belief and expression, religious freedom generally is the lifeblood of our culture. It's part of who we are. But it operates on a different basis than scientific and other knowledge. It operates on the basis of faith. And faith, by its very different definition, consists of things that are true, but not evidenced in traditional ways or provable empirically. So it becomes a very dangerous thing when people start doing that, because what they're really saying is it's okay to pay lip service to religiosity. It's okay to draw near to God with your lips, but don't you dare do anything indicating that your heart is also close to him and that you really do believe it, or else you will be punished. That's just really creepy. So separate and apart from the constitutional issues that presents, it's also a cultural issue and a political one, one that I don't think most Americans are willing to accept. The idea that somebody could be discriminated against. Now, I'm sensitive to this because I'm a religious minority myself. My people were, members of my faith were ordered exterminated by the governor of Missouri on October 27th, 1838, just solely because of their religious beliefs. These things really do happen. Human nature, even in the United States of America, is such that bad things happen when people start mistreating each other based on not on what they do, but who they are, and particularly on what they believe.
Speaking of religion, let's talk about the parade of horribles we've heard from the left on Roe versus Wade, on Obamacare. We've had Roe versus Wade on the books since 1973, 47 years, and every time there's a Republican nominated Supreme Court justice, Democrats say the sky is falling and Roe versus Wade is being overturned. They're doing that with Obamacare now. That essentially that Judge Barrett is on some mission, maybe from God, to go overturn Obamacare and pre-existing conditions, despite the fact that she's a mother of 7 kids, including one with Down syndrome. So here is a question we have from Steve Dennis. He asked this question. He's a reporter. He asked this question. Millions of people, including yourself, have been working for decades to overturn Roe, only to be disappointed when Republican appointed justices end up saving it. How hopeful are you that the court will finally fully reverse Roe and restore the ability of states to decide abortion laws?
Look, I don't know what happens to Roe itself. You do, as you described, see a parade of horribles laid out every time this comes up, including one that goes back 8 years prior to Roe, with the obsessive focusing on Griswold versus Connecticut. One of my colleagues, Senator Blumenthal, the other day actually went so far as to suggest that Judge Barrett would be hostile to that and would support undoing that, and that would lead to perhaps laws that would then be enacted and upheld prohibiting or otherwise restricting access to contraception. And he even went so far as to suggest that people in this country might be afraid of and deterred from using contraception as a result of Judge Barrett's nomination and possible confirmation to the Supreme Court of the United States. This is just patently absurd. First of all, on the Griswold front, there's not a state in the union that would prohibit access to contraception. In fact, even at the time Griswold versus Connecticut was decided in 1965, this was something that was not enforced, except in the very narrow, rare circumstances of that case, where by all appearances, Planned Parenthood moved into the state of Connecticut and engaged in conduct that appeared to be designed specifically to prompt legal action and prompt them into being fined. But even though that was technically the law in Connecticut at the time, and even though it was a lawsuit that appears to have been prompted by Planned Parenthood, there is not a state in the union that has these laws on the books today, nor is there a state in the union that would even consider, much less enact, legislation banning contraception. With Roe, even if you would, in order to imagine a world in which Roe were just wholesale overturned, you would have to have a number of things line up. You'd have to have, most likely, a few states attempt to ban abortion altogether, which very, very few states are likely to do. Then you'd have to have a few lower courts reach different conclusions in response to that. And then the Supreme Court would presumably, in order to resolve the conflict between the circuits, you would have to have at least 4 justices wanting to bring up the case. And then you'd have to have at least 5 justices inclined to say that, after reviewing the standards applicable through stare decisis, that we're going to overturn it. Even then, that doesn't mean that abortion would be illegal across the United States. In fact, according to most people that I talk to, very few, if any, states would actually ban it. The biggest single difference, if all those things lined up, and that, I'm not saying that couldn't occur, but if all those things did align, if all those things did happen, the biggest practical consequence of that would be you would have states have the ability to decide at the margins health and safety regulations and restrictions on things that deal with at what stage an abortion is still appropriate, what to do with fetal pain, and what to do with the decision regarding at what point an unborn human is worth protecting or can experience and respond to pain. So anyway, this is a much more complex question than the left wants to make it out to be, but I think it is a deliberate decision on the part of the left to use this as a scare tactic and as bait for fundraising.
Well, I know you have to get going here to your 11 o'clock. Do you have any parting words for the group before you take off? Anything you want to discuss or talk about?
Yeah. So, like on the religious freedom point that we were talking about a minute ago, it really is startling if you look at the words. I never expected that in the United States Senate, it would be popular to raise questions like this. And I remember, I think you were still there, Mike, this was a couple years ago, after we had several incidents like these, where judicial nominees had their religious views called into question. I raised this at a Judiciary Committee hearing, not attacking anyone in particular, and is not attacking anyone at all, but just saying, I think we need to be careful. I think we need to be sensitive to people's religious beliefs. And I don't think a nominee's religious beliefs are relevant to our inquiry. And they certainly shouldn't be subjected to ridicule based on them. One of my colleagues, Senator Hirono, responded and essentially said, look, I am going to call those into question if I think they're out of the mainstream. That is the problem. When somebody's willing to say, well, religious freedom's great and everything, but what that means is it's got to be the right kind of religious freedom, or it's got to be the right kind of religious belief. It's got to be what I consider to be in the mainstream, what I consider to be polite society sort of religious thinking. And that's really not okay. And that is something we ought to be concerned about. More broadly, I can't emphasize enough, if the fact that conservatives, at least judicial conservatives like me, have no interest in using the courts for social engineering. I mean, we have no interest in using the courts to engage in the sort of policymaking that you saw in 1905 with Lochner versus New York, where conservatives used the Constitution as pretext for going in and invalidating minimum wage, maximum hour standards adopted under New York law for bakery employees. That is an example of how emanating into the penumbra, or the use of substantive due process, this process by which people will say, this case involves X, and X is very important. Because X is very important, it must be in the Constitution. And we therefore deem it to be in the Constitution. It's part of due process, in fact, because it's really important. We've got to remember what Potter Stewart said on occasion. In fact, he used these words in Griswold versus Connecticut, where he said, this is an uncommonly silly law. It's also a law that's almost never enforced, never should be enforced, and probably wouldn't have been enforced but for the desire of the defendant in that case to prompt litigation. But he said, notwithstanding the fact that it's an uncommonly silly law that's basically never enforced, states do have the ability to make decisions that are stupid. In fact, it's part of the process of political accountability. It gets back to my broader point. We have no interest in using the courts for social engineering, for scoring political points on economic, regulatory front, or otherwise. What we want is simply judges who will read the law based on the common understanding and the accepted premise that there is a right answer under the law, and that answer can in some ways be, that it can be ascertained by reference to the text. Laws consist of words. Words have meaning. You have to look at the original public meaning of the words themselves at the time they were put into the law or a provision of the Constitution, as the case may be. Doesn't mean that we can ascertain or even want or need to ascertain the subjective intent of any lawmaker or drafter at the time. That's actually quite irrelevant. We don't care about that. All we want is to understand what the original public meaning of that word was. That, at the end of the day, is not a politically or economically or religiously conservative or liberal ideal. It's just saying we want these people to be referees and not policymakers. I don't think it's too much to ask. It's not radical. It's not extreme. And it actually will lead to a greater degree of harmony in the United States. It's why I laugh sometimes when some of these protesters, people protesting Judge Barrett or some of the other judicial nominees that we've said, sometimes chant, this is what democracy looks like, as they're chanting, overlooking the fact that they've got it all backwards. Representative government isn't on display in the judiciary. It's the wrong branch. You want and need people to be able to enact policy or stop policy through their elected policymakers. You don't want that done through 9 lawyers wearing robes with life tenure, because it's not their job. And it relates back to the original description by Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 78 between Article 1 and Article 3. Article 1, the legislative branch exercises judgment. It prescribes policies. Article 3, the judicial branch, the legislative branch exercises will, not judgment, policy prescriptions. Article 3, the judicial branch engages in judgment, which is just the interpretation of law. This says X, not Y. That's all we want. That's not too much to ask. Thanks so much for having me today, Mike.
Yeah, thank you very much, Senator Lee. Really appreciate it.